Well, it is October 30th of 2022. Time for another review. And some of you, there was someone in a comment section the other day said something about some spooky reviews for Halloween. So I don't I don't have exactly that, but I did manage to scrape up some interesting quasi Halloween related material for the evening, so hopefully you won't be disappointed. But some of tonight's reviews contain fiction reviews, which is a departure from my usual nonfiction parapolitical fare. So this is WarDay by Whitley, Strieber, and James Kunetka. Not sure if I was saying that right. And this is from, I want to say, like 86 or 87 or so. It might be before that. 1984. So this was published in 1984. And this I got because it was mentioned in a Nick Redfern book about alien abductions. And I'm going to link that at the end of this video. So be sure to check the end screen for a link to that, because right off the top of my head, I can't remember the title of that. But the reason I was intrigued by its mention in that book about alien abductions was Nick Redfern did a whole section on how many abductees were shown visions or of apocalyptic visions involving the destruction of the earth by nuclear fire or whatever. And one of the things he mentioned was that Whitley Strieber, prior to his very famous book Communion, wrote this, and he also wrote some other books. I think there's a horror book that I have around here too that I'll get around to covering at some point. But WarDay is interesting in that it is a hypothetical treatment of what would happen to the United States after a limited nuclear exchange with the Soviet Union. So like I said, I mainly got this because of Nick Redfern's mention of it, and I was curious as how relatable it was to some of the other topics. But this reads like it was commissioned by an intelligence agency, and I say that because it's presented. In fact, I think they even use their own names in this. They don't change. Obviously, it's a fictionalized account, but they use their actual names, and they write it as though they are two reporters reporting on the state of the United States after WarDay, which of course in this book is that's what everyone calls the day that the nukes flew back and forth and blew a bunch of stuff up. And in his account of this, the way he depicts it is only a few key cities, like the San Antonio area, of course, here in Texas, gets just completely devastated because that entire town is nothing but aerospace and military bases. So he talks about what was left over after this initial strike, that they kind of had these missile salvos back and forth and then stopped. And then with what was left, everybody kind of tried to continue on. And there are certain areas like the Dallas area that I'm from was not as affected. It is still inhabited by people. But it's a really interesting, if you're into post-apocalyptic fiction, this is actually pretty well done and pretty realistic in its depiction of that. And it's not as simple as just being over-the-top doom and gloom. I think that's what really sets this apart, as this actually does seem like someone in an intelligence capacity said, hey, Mr. Strieber, could you imagine for us what it would be like in a world where there was only a limited nuclear exchange? And this came into my mind just because of all of the ramping up of nuclear talk between the United States and Russia over Ukraine and all that. So I find this book really interesting in that respect, that this came out also around a time when there were a lot of the big think tanks like the Rand Corporation and those kind of guys were trying to envision what a limited nuclear exchange would look like and how survivable that was. So again, overall, it's fascinating fiction. It is a little odd that they do use their actual names in this. Nothing really jumped out at me. There's nothing in here UFO related or anything like that. And surprisingly, I don't think I dog-eared so much as a single page. So there was nothing in this that just really jumped out at me, other than just I found the overall theme to be somewhat telling in that given Whitley Strieber's other work, it does make you wonder if someone said, hey, write this book. I do find it interesting that in this, I think California is almost treated as a separate country after this happens, and California is the most advanced and sophisticated of the surviving states. So that's an interesting detail. And there's only a couple of scenes where they visit California that get a little, they have to work a little hard to fill in some of the plot holes there of how they get into and out of California, since it's like another country. But overall, interesting book. And like I said, it's basically just from the eyewitness perspective of where these guys were on the WarDay when the war broke out, which I think they're saying is in October of 1988. And this book is written as though it's just a few years after that. And they've been tasked with going around the nation, kind of seeing what the state of the nation is after this. So overall, interesting post-apocalyptic literature. As far as from a parapolitical angle, there's nothing really stand out in this that just really that I feel worthwhile putting into this, other than just, to me, the biggest thing that I thought was just that overriding thought idea that someone seemed to have encouraged them to write a book about what the United States would look like after a limited nuclear exchange versus the typical all-out, everything's blown up kind of point of view. So anyway, enough about that. If you are into post-apocalyptic literature, this is very realistically written and worth noting, especially in light of Whitley Strieber's other work like Communion. So I'll leave it at that.